The mountains of Colorado have a way of holding on to secrets. They stand silent, unmoving. As years pass by, watching everything and remembering every sin, when I returned to Cedar Valley that autumn, I didn't know the land was hiding one of those secrets. But it didn't take long before I found out. My name is Michael Grant, and this story begins the day I drove down Maple Hollow Road, expecting to see my father's land, the 52 acres he spent half his life protecting. What I found instead was something else entirely. The road that used to be dirt was now paved and shining black, lined with trimmed grass and brand new mailboxes. Children rode bikes past where my father's wheat once grew. Streetlights hummed quietly against the blue evening sky. And right there, on a tall wooden sign with gold letters, it read, "Welcome to Pine Ridge Estates, a Summit Ridge community." I remember sitting in my truck for a long time. Engine off, hands gripping the wheel. I didn't understand what I was looking at. My father's cabin used to sit beyond that ridge, just past the old oak tree that leaned toward the stream. But now there were houses, dozens of them. Identical roofs, manicured lawns, and fences so white they hurt your eyes. It felt wrong, artificial, like someone had erased my childhood with concrete and paint. I got out of the truck and walked past one of the houses. There was a woman standing by her porch holding a cup of coffee. She smiled politely and said, "Beautiful neighborhood, isn't it?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah," I said quietly. "It's unbelievable." She laughed, not hearing the weight behind my words. The HOA really keeps things perfect around here. It's nice to have people who care about the community, you know? The HOA. That word hung in the air like smoke. I walked further down the street. The numbers on the houses went higher, but my confusion deepened. Every step I took brought back memories of a place that no longer existed. The creek where my father taught me to fish. The meadow where we planted sunflowers every spring. The small shed that once smelled of cedar and sawdust. All of it gone. I stopped beside a no trespassing of private property sign staked into the soil my father once called home. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something deep inside me crack. That night, I rented a room at a roadside motel a few miles away. The walls were thin, the air smelled faintly of bleach, and the only thing louder than the hum of the air conditioner was the storm inside my head. How could this have happened? How could someone just build an entire neighborhood on our land? When morning came, I drove straight to the Cedar Valley County Recorder's office. The building hadn't changed much, still the same beige walls, the same tired clerks behind glass windows. A young woman at the counter looked up as I approached. "I'm looking for a property record," I said. "Edward Grant Estate, 52 acres off Maple Hollow Road." She typed the name, eyes flicking across her monitor. After a moment, her expression shifted from neutral to puzzled. That parcel doesn't seem to exist anymore," she murmured. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "It's been absorbed into Pine Ridge Estates. The developer registered it under new zoning blocks about 3 years ago." "Absorbed?" I repeated, the word tasting like rust. "By who?" She scrolled again. "Summit Ridge Development Group. They filed ownership for Block C through F in 2019. I leaned closer to the glass. "Transferred how?" "There should have been taxes, legal paperwork, a sale." She shook her head. "Looks like a reclassification. Sometimes parcels get merged if taxes aren't paid, or if land is unclaimed. Happens more often than you'd think. But my father never missed a payment. Not once. And after he passed, the property taxes were automatically withdrawn every year. There was no debt, no delinquency, no sale. Something was wrong. "Can I get copies of everything you have?" I asked. She nodded and printed pages until the machine coughed out the last sheet. I left with a thick stack of documents clutched in my hands. Papers that were supposed to make sense of it all. But when I sat in my truck and read through them, the truth hit like a blow to the chest. There was a boundary correction made in 2018, a clerical error from a county-wide digital map update. Somehow the system had shortened the borders of my land by nearly 30 acres. And those missing acres were now under the homes of Pine Ridge Estates. A mistake. A bureaucratic oversight. But one someone had clearly noticed and exploited. Because Summit Ridge Development had filed for construction exactly 1 month after that mapping update. Coincidence? Not a chance. That evening, I drove back to the site. The sunset painted the sky in gold and blood-red streaks, as I parked near the construction area. Cement trucks rumbled, saws screamed, and men in orange vests moved like ants over the skeletons of half-built homes. A sign read, Phase 4, final lots available, starting at $680,000. I stood at the edge of the property, boots sinking into the cold dirt. I could almost hear my father's voice. Son, land's the only thing worth fighting for. They can take your job, your money, your pride, but not your soil. He'd said that 100 times when I was a boy, and standing there, watching strangers hammer walls into my inheritance, I finally understood what he meant. I didn't yell, didn't march into their offices or call the police. I just stared, silent and still, until the last truck drove away. Then I turned around and whispered to the wind, All right, Dad, let's do this your way. The next morning I drove to Denver. In a storage unit on the outskirts of the city sat a cedar chest that hadn't been opened in over a decade. Inside were my father's tools, old maps, and a leather folder marked land title, Grant Estate. My hands trembled as I undid the clasp. There it was, the original deed, dated, notarized, sealed with the county stamp. Every coordinate precisely written, every boundary clear, the real record, the one the digital files couldn't erase. I sat on the concrete floor of that storage unit, holding the paper in my hands. That land was still ours. It always had been. But this wasn't just about reclaiming dirt and trees. This was about something bigger. They had stolen my father's legacy, and I was going to make them pay for it. Not with rage, not with threats, with patience. The kind that cuts deeper than any weapon. If I stormed in now, they'd fight back. The developer, the HOA, the lawyers. They'd stall and twist and cover their tracks. But if I waited until the last nail was driven, until every home was sold and every mortgage finalized, then they'd have nowhere to run. So I waited. For months, I played the role of a ghost. I documented everything. Drone photos, construction updates, permit filings, house listings, HOA announcements. Every week I collected proof. I even attended one of their open houses under a fake name. The air smelled like fresh paint and money. There were banners, refreshments, families walking through brand new homes. And there she was, Karen Whitmore, the HOA president. Mid-50s, sharp suit, tighter smile, the kind of woman who thrived on control. Welcome to Pine Ridge Estates, she said brightly, extending a hand. I'm Karen, HOA president. It's wonderful to see so much interest in our community. I shook her hand and asked casually, Beautiful area. Who owned the land before? Oh, she laughed, waving dismissively. Some neglected old property. The developer cleaned it up. It was practically abandoned. Abandoned. That word hit harder than she could have imagined. She kept talking, so about bylaws, maintenance fees, homeowner committees, but her voice faded into static. All I could hear was the echo of chainsaws cutting through my father's trees, the splash of concrete burying his soil. I left before she finished her pitch. That night, I sat in my truck outside the neighborhood, engine off, watching the lights flicker on in house after house. 96 homes, 96 families living on a lie. And I let them, because every passing day meant more money spent, more contracts signed, more evidence that this wasn't an accident. It was theft. By winter, construction was complete. The grand opening was celebrated with balloons, banners, and a ribbon-cutting ceremony. The local paper called it a triumph of suburban expansion, but they had no idea what they'd built on. When the last for sale sign came down, I made my move. I called Laura Chen, an old law school friend turned property attorney in Denver. She was sharp, calm, and fearless, exactly what I needed. She answered on the second ring. Michael Grant? Wow, it's been years. What's up? I took a deep breath and told her everything. From the missing boundary to the 96 homes, there was silence on the line, then a slow exhale. You're saying they built an entire subdivision on your family's land? Yes. And you have the original deed? I do, signed, sealed, and certified. When she spoke again, her voice was low and certain. Then you're sitting on a gold mine, and they're sitting on a mistake that's going to destroy them. We met that night in her office overlooking downtown Denver. She laid out every paper under bright white lights, tracing lines with her pen, comparing records, zooming into satellite images. Michael, she said finally, this isn't just carelessness. This is fraud. Someone at Summit Ridge had to know that parcel wasn't clear. I nodded slowly. Can we prove it? Oh, we'll prove it, she said, her eyes glinting. But not yet. You did the right thing by waiting. The more they build, the more damage they owe you. You're going to take back every inch of it, legally. It was the first time I allowed myself to smile. Over the next few weeks, we gathered allies. George Hines, an old surveyor who'd worked with my father decades ago, found the original survey markers stored on microfilm. When he matched them against modern satellite data, they overlapped perfectly with the Pine Ridge subdivision. We had them. George looked up from his papers one afternoon and said, "Your dad would have been proud of you, son. You're doing this the right way." "Maybe," I said quietly. "But I think he'd rather the fight wasn't needed." As spring came, rumors began to stir in town. Someone from the county office must have talked. Whispers that the Pine Ridge development might have boundary issues. When a local reporter asked HOA President Karen about it, she laughed. "Oh, please," she said on camera. "It's nonsense. People just love to make trouble." I watched that interview later, her fake smile plastered across the screen. She looked confident, arrogant. But what she didn't know was that the storm had already started. Laura had filed the pre-suit notice that morning. Within days, the entire development, all 96 homes, would be listed in a court case under one name. Grant vs. Pine Ridge HOA and Summit Ridge Development. Every light in every window of that pristine neighborhood was about to flicker with the same realization. They'd built their dreams on someone else's land. That night, I drove to the outskirts of Cedar Valley and parked on the ridge. The wind carried the faint hum of streetlights below. The same land that once smelled of cedar and earth now buzzed with quiet suburban perfection. I closed my eyes and could almost hear my father again. His voice calm, certain, unbending. "Patience, Michael. The land always remembers who it belongs to." I looked down at the glowing rooftops, a sea of lights stretching across what once was ours, and I smiled, slow, quiet, certain, because tomorrow the truth would start its slow, unstoppable march through the courthouse doors. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was restoration. The earth was finally taking back its name, and I was going to make sure everyone in Pine Ridge Estates never forgot it. The day the lawsuit was filed, Cedar Valley changed forever. I remember standing outside the Jefferson County Courthouse at dawn. The mountains were still wrapped in fog, and the courthouse steps gleamed with dew. In my hands, I carried a single folder. Inside it, the deed my father had signed in 1978. That paper was older than the homes, the roads, the people who claimed to own them, and now it was about to speak. By 10 a.m., the case was public. Grant versus Pine Ridge HOA and Summit Ridge Development Group. It spread through town like wildfire. News outlets picked it up, social media buzzed, and suddenly, everyone wanted to know who the quiet man was claiming to own an entire neighborhood. By noon, the HOA had called an emergency meeting. From my truck, I watched their board gather inside the community hall, the same one they'd built right where my father's barn used to stand. Through the glass windows, I could see their panic. Phones out, voices raised, confusion everywhere. They thought it was a mistake. They thought I was bluffing. They were wrong. 3 days later, I walked into the courtroom for the first hearing. The air was heavy, the kind of silence that hums with anticipation. On one side sat the Summit Ridge legal team, 5 lawyers in matching suits, all polished smiles and cold eyes. Beside them sat Karen Whitmore, president of the HOA, arms crossed tightly, face pale but defiant. On the other side, just me and Laura Chen. When the judge entered, everyone rose. The sound of chairs scraping echoed through the chamber. The opening arguments began, and the developer's attorney wasted no time trying to discredit me. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "the plaintiff's claim is based on outdated documentation and an alleged clerical error from over 4 decades ago. Pine Ridge Estates was built on land lawfully transferred through proper zoning procedures." Laura didn't flinch. She waited for her turn, then stood. "Your Honor, we have in our possession the original notarized deed of ownership, certified by Jefferson County in 1978, complete with boundary coordinates, tax receipts, and survey maps, all proving that Mr. Grant's land was never sold, never forfeited, and never transferred." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward. You have the original deed? Yes, Your Honor, Laura said, handing over a sealed envelope. With county seals and witness signatures intact. The developer's attorney's smile faltered. He leaned toward his client, whispering urgently. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker behind their confidence. The judge opened the envelope, studied the papers, then looked at the defense. These documents appear authentic. I'll have them verified by the county clerk immediately. Karen shifted uneasily in her seat, her arms uncrossed. She looked smaller now. The next hearing came 2 weeks later, and that's when the truth began to unravel. The county clerk confirmed my documents were genuine. The deed was valid, registered, and untampered. But when Laura requested the original digital records from the county archives, something strange appeared. The boundary change that had erased my land segment was traced back to a manual edit. Someone had physically altered the map file in 2018. Not a computer glitch, a human hand. The courtroom went silent when Laura displayed the digital logs on the screen. A single line of data highlighted in red. User, twellero@summitridgedev.com. Timestamp, March 22, 2018. Boundary correction submitted. Tom Weller, the CEO of Summit Ridge Development. He'd filed the correction himself. The judge raised an eyebrow. Is this accurate? The county IT representative nodded. Yes, Your Honor. That edit came directly from Summit Ridge's submission system. It was never reviewed by the zoning board before being added to the county database. The sound that followed wasn't noise, it was the collapse of arrogance. Weller's lawyer scrambled to object, but the damage was done. Every word on that screen was legal dynamite. Karen's face went pale as paper. She turned toward Weller, whispering sharply, "You said this was legal." I didn't move, didn't speak. I just watched, because in that moment I knew the land was already mine again. Over the next month, the case deepened. Dozens of homeowners sat in the gallery, whispering nervously. They'd bought their dream houses in good faith, unaware they stood on stolen ground. Reporters filled the aisles. Every headline told the same story. Man claims HOA built on his land, and he can prove it. Cedar Valley development fraud exposed. The man who outsmarted an HOA. But to me, it wasn't about fame or headlines. It was about legacy. Laura called George Hines, my father's old surveyor, as an expert witness. He stood there, old but steady, hands trembling slightly as he held up the original field notes. I measured that land with Edward Grant myself, he said. Every tree, every line. I remember that oak by the stream. We drove a steel pin right next to it. That pin still sits beneath Pine Ridge's community playground. Gasps filled the courtroom. The judge leaned forward. You're saying the original boundary markers are still there? Yes, Your Honor, George said firmly. Under 6 inches of soil. Buried but untouched. The next day, the court authorized a land inspection. When we arrived at Pine Ridge, the air was tense. HOA members gathered behind fences, whispering as court officers marked off the area near the playground. Reporters hovered like vultures, cameras ready. A technician used a metal detector and within seconds, beep. He dug a small hole and there it was. A steel pin, rusted but solid. Engraved initials, e.g., 1978. The judge himself came down to witness it. When he saw the initials, he said nothing, just looked at Weller and shook his head. That was the moment the fight was over. In the final hearing, Summit Ridge tried one last move, offering me a settlement. They'd pay me $3 million to drop the claim. Laura turned to me quietly. It's your call, Michael. I looked across the room, at Weller's smug face, at Karen's folded arms, at the rows of families watching, holding their breath. Then I shook my head. No deal. The defense attorney blinked. Mr. Grant, you'd rather destroy an entire neighborhood than accept a fair settlement? I leaned forward slightly, my voice calm but steady. No, I'm not destroying anything. I'm just taking back what's mine. The judge called for order. When he read the verdict 2 weeks later, the entire town held its breath. In the matter of Grant versus Pine Ridge HOA and Summit Ridge Development Group, the court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Michael Grant, all land comprising the Pine Ridge subdivision, totaling 52 acres, is hereby recognized as property of the Grant estate. The room erupted in stunned murmurs. The judge continued, voice steady. The court further orders that Summit Ridge and its affiliates compensate Mr. Grant for unlawful construction, Land occupation and damages. The HOA's authority is suspended until further notice. I didn't smile. Didn't raise a fist or look for cameras. I just closed my eyes and breathed, the first real breath I'd taken in years. The weeks that followed were chaos. Reporters swarmed, homeowners panicked, lawyers called day and night. The headlines turned feverish. HOA loses entire neighborhood in court. 96 homes built on wrong land. Owner wins it all. People begged for leniency. Some cursed me. But I didn't want to evict anyone. I wasn't the villain in this story. Instead, I offered a deal. Every homeowner could stay. They'd just pay land rent directly to me instead of the HOA. As for the HOA itself, I dissolved it through the court. Their bylaws, their committees, their little empires of control, gone overnight. Karen tried to confront me once. She came to my new office, the same building that used to be her HOA headquarters. "You ruined everything," she hissed. "No," I said quietly. "You did that the day you built over something you didn't own." Her voice trembled. "You don't understand. People trusted me." "Then maybe," I said, "you should have trusted the truth." She didn't reply. She just left, her heels clicking on the tile until the door closed behind her. Months later, Pine Ridge looked different. The same houses stood, the same families lived there, but something had changed. The arrogance was gone. The fear had faded. People waved when they saw me drive by. They called me Mr. Grant, not the man who sued us. They understood now. I hadn't taken their homes. I just reminded them whose ground they stood on. Sometimes at dusk, I'd park at the top of the ridge and watch the lights blink on across the valley. It was quiet, peaceful, the way it used to be when my father and I would sit outside the cabin. The world slowing around us, only now the silence carried new meaning. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through the pine trees, calm and sure, reminding those who listen that truth doesn't vanish. It waits. One evening, Laura came by with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. She looked around the land and smiled. "So," she said, "what will you do with all this now?" I looked at the homes below. The same roofs that once symbolized theft now glowed with life. "Maybe I'll build something my father would have liked," I said. "A park. Maybe a community center for the kids. Something honest." Laura nodded. "You could have taken millions, Michael. Why didn't you?" I smiled faintly. "Because it was never about money. It was about respect. For the man who taught me that land remembers." She raised her glass. "To Edward Grant." I raised mine. "And to Patience." The glasses clinked softly in the twilight. A year later, a small plaque appeared near the entrance of Pine Ridge, now renamed Grant Ridge Estates. It read, "This land was built on truth, not power. Owned by those who remember where they came from." And below that, a single line my father used to say, "Measure twice, act once." I still visit the oak by the stream. It survived somehow. Its branches stretch wide, shadowing the water just like before. Beneath it lies the marker my father drove into the soil, initials still faintly visible. Every time I touch it, I remember the long road that brought me here, from disbelief to patience, from patience to justice. The land never forgot who it belonged to. It just waited for me to remember too. Now, when I walk through the quiet streets of Grant Ridge at night, I hear the soft laughter of children playing, the wind brushing through pine needles, the hum of life returning to something pure again. And I think to myself, sometimes the best revenge is restoration, letting time and truth rebuild what greed tried to destroy. My father's land stands whole again. The homes still shine under the Colorado sky. But beneath every foundation, under every inch of pavement, one truth remains carved into the soil. It was always mine.